I would like to formally move the motion before us tonight. And before I get into the substantive of the motion, I want to just briefly comment on the government amendment. And reading through the government amendment, one would be under the impression that the initiatives and the policies that they are implementing in relation to youth unemployment is actually working. And I have to say, when I read it and I read some of the way that the figures were being massaged, there was no doubt that it was insulting to those very young people who are boarding planes tonight and tomorrow to try and find employment elsewhere. And I would ask any government TD to go and knock on the doors of the housing estates where they represent and ask the people who answer whether their policies in relation to youth unemployment and emigration are working. And it's clear that this government is living in denial while our young people are living in London and Sydney and Chicago and elsewhere around the world. And I know a lot will be spoken tonight and tomorrow on the issue of emigration by various ministers and by other members of the Oireachtas. However, there will be one voice which won't be heard in this chamber, and that's the voice of those young people who have been forced to emigrate. And that's why I want to begin this debate with the words of a young lad by the name of Anthony McDermott, who was forced to emigrate to Australia. And before he left, he wrote, "Will they meet us on the runway and welcome us home with great cheers? And will the men in power and the bankers give us back our long-lost years? Now my generation's leaving, a generation going away, a generation that didn't cause this mess, but a generation that has to pay." And I think that sums up the views and the thinking of many young people who have been forced to emigrate. Because, Minister, a whole generation is leaving. On average last year, 1,700 people left this state every single week. And since 2011, over 250,000 people have emigrated. There are more people leaving this state now than at any time during the 80s. And of those leaving, 70% of them are in their 20s, while 62% of them are graduates. Highly educated young people, the very lifeblood of this state, the very people that we need to help grow and nourish our economic recovery. And unfortunately, many of them are leaving for shores abroad. And that's not to even mention the heartbreak of the families of those young people who are suffering. Now, differing ministers have spoken in the past about emigration being a choice, as it was a good thing. Some ministers who listen to them, it sounds like it's a school exchange program for a year and everyone's going to come back, and those young people who are off out are having the time of their lives. But I think if you look at the recently published reports in relation to emigration, it found that 39.5% of all recent emigrants would like to return to Ireland within 3 years, but only 22% of them see it as being a likelihood. 78% of emigrants did not envisage a return to Ireland within the next 3 years, and that, unfortunately, is a damning indictment on this government and the previous government's response to emigration. We have lost a generation, and that generation is seeking work, it's seeking employment, it's seeking access to training and education, and it's a generation that want to work. And I notice the Minister for Social Protection is with us tonight. Minister, you yourself are cutting the very benefits to young people. The Minister for Jobs is failing to recognise that we even have a crisis. Because if you look at his own department, he's failed abysmally in terms of job creation for young people. The key government programme for creating employment is the Action Plan on Jobs. And last year the Action Plan had 333 areas across the government to increase employment. And only five out of 333 actually dealt with young people. And what's the plan for next year? The Department of Jobs has identified 7 key themes for their Action Plan on Jobs, and not one of them explicitly mentions youth unemployment. Minister for Social Protection and the Taoiseach has made much of the upcoming Youth Guarantee programme. And that's a programme which aims to ensure that every young person has an opportunity of quality employment, training or continuing education. And yet every question of which we've tabled to the Minister for Jobs on this issue and on the issue of the youth guarantee and creating that employment has been transferred out of his department. He won't even answer questions in relation to the youth guarantee and job creation. So it appears that youth unemployment is not an issue for the Minister for Jobs. Now, we've long called for the development of a youth guarantee to address the problem and to help stem emigration. My colleague, Senator Catherine Riley, has been particularly active on this issue. She headed up a report within the committee on the whole area of the youth guarantee. And if you look at some of the figures which have been bandied around in terms of the youth guarantee, the Youth Council, the Irish Youth Council, has set a figure of about 400 million wouldn't be needed to adequately fund the youth guarantee in this state. The International Labour Organisation has called for a total fund of approximately 435 million. And last week I noticed that the Taoiseach, when he was in Paris discussing this very issue, promised a fund of about 200 million over the next 2 years. But yet in your own government budget announcements in October, only 14 million was set aside. Now, I think the government needs to come clean during this debate tonight and tomorrow night on exactly what is the value of the youth guarantee going to be, what is going to be invested into it, and where is that money coming from. Because we need that detail, and more importantly, those people who are contemplating emigration need that detail, because they need to be given some hope that this crisis is going to be dealt with. We need to be setting targets for stemming emigration and for creating jobs, particularly for our young people. And without the proper funding, the proper plans and the proper targets being put in place, unfortunately all we have is more political rhetoric. Now, I know over the next 2 nights a lot is going to be made of JobBridge, and I just want to comment briefly on JobBridge. I mean, the phrase itself would suggest that it's a bridge to full-time employment, it's a bridge to a job. Yet if we look at some of the areas which are actually now utilising JobBridge, Minister, and in my other role as an education spokesperson, I've seen it very clearly, where we now have a number of positions within the teaching profession being advertised on JobBridge. And the INTO have been very vocal on this, and they have said that it amounts to exploitation of young teachers. Because if you look at it, we are asking young teachers to work very highly pressurised jobs, teaching our future generations for an additional €50 a week. And there's little or no guarantee of employment coming out on the back of that. It's merely an attempt by the department to try and shore up falling teaching numbers. And it is a de facto abolition of the minimum wage. That's how I see it. As of the 1st of November, the figures that I have is that there was 58 teaching positions have now been filled using JobBridge. And I'd like the Minister, either for Social Protection or the Minister for Education, to indicate how many of those 58 teachers which are now in the JobBridge scheme are going to actually get full-time employment at the end of their internship. Because I don't think any of them are, because that's just the nature of education. They're being used at the moment. And I know of one young teacher, because if we're not exploiting them through JobBridge, then we're telling them that they're phased elsewhere. Because I know of one young music teacher from Drogheda, who when she went into a local force office, was told that there was a job in Madrid teaching the violin, and she was advised to apply for that. That's what she was told in a centre which was there to try and help young people into employment. And I just think it's a scandal, and it's just another signal by this government of an on-your-bike approach to job creation. The outworking of the government's economic policy, from where I stand on this side of the chamber and from where a lot of people outside this chamber stand, is about high unemployment and emigration. And the response by this government in its amendment to our motion is deeply cynical. The do-nothing approach, which has the hallmark of this government, and hoping that the problem goes away, is quite literally working, because the problem is going away. Unfortunately, it's going away on planes and boats, and it's emigrating, and there's very little prospect of it returning. The young people, the very young people who should be contributing to the economic recovery and building of our future in Ireland, are being found in Australia and Canada and in England and in the States. And the government's lack of action has undermined the long-term sustainability of this economy. It has wrenched families and communities apart. But this problem can be resolved, Minister, and our young people are looking for hope and opportunity. And I hope over the next 2 nights that they hear some of that hope and opportunity from all sides of the House. I genuinely hope that, because it's not beyond this government's capability to use some of the wealth that this state has, and we do have some wealth, Minister, to actually instil that hope and to deliver that opportunity. And last Concur, I want to commend the Sinn Féin motion to the House here tonight.